In this video, we will be covering the Godzilla King of the Monsters Kodansha manga and how strong this version of Godzilla is. Originally serialized in the manga DX Bomb Bomb from 1992 to 1993, this manga series is actually set in the Heisei universe timeline. However, as it's revealed later on, it's actually a merge between both the Showa and Heisei era timelines, since it features clones of many Showa-era Godzilla monsters, as well as directly referencing the existence of the Showa-era monsters themselves. Which raises its own set of questions, like where the heck's the Showa Godzilla during all the events? Best not to think about it. Set sometime after the events of the Heisei movie Godzilla vs. Mothra from 1992, the first volume of the King of the Monsters manga actually came out roughly a week before the Godzilla vs. Mothra movie came out. Just thought you should keep this in mind, as it means that people writing this manga knew of the upcoming Godzilla vs. Mothra movie. They weren't privy to all the details of what exactly happened in said movie. This will be important near the end of the story. Since it's not clear how long exactly after the events of the Godzilla vs. Mothra movie this story takes place, I'm just going to be using Godzilla's power at the time of the vs. Mothra movie. I'll also be using an alternative numeric way to determine how strong Godzilla gets throughout the story, because he gets quite a few power-ups. This will also help simplify for those who don't like big numbers to keep track of how strong all the monsters are relative to each other. With that being said, let's finally get into it. So a mad scientist by the name of Mad Oniyama, yeah, that's his actual name, decides, hey, I'm gonna conquer the world despite multiple alien forces failing to do so in the past, as well as people from the future. To start off, he creates a modified clone of Baragon called Sea Baragon, given amphibious abilities. Specifically, a clone of the Baragon from the Frankenstein vs. the World movie, and not the obviously stronger version from Destroy All Monsters. Well, that's debatable, seeing as how he didn't really do anything in that movie, but he did fight King Ghidorah along with all the other monsters in the manga. Anyway, so he eventually runs into Godzilla. The two have a fight. He manages to impale Godzilla through the chest, an injury Godzilla is going to be taking a lot in this series, before taking off Godzilla and he rips his horn off, and then one-shotting him with an atomic breath. A lot of the fights in the story involve Godzilla briefly fighting a monster in close quarters, them managing to impale him through the chest, before Godzilla gets ticked off and usually rips off a part of their body, before one-shotting them with an atomic breath. Since Sea Baragon was able to pierce Godzilla's skin, but was still easily beaten by Godzilla, who was able to still easily tear off a piece of his body and one-shot him with an atomic breath, I'm just gonna say at the very least Sea Baragon's just a tier below Godzilla in terms of power. He's strong enough to injure him, to impale him through the body, but can't really hold up against the same amount of damage once Godzilla attacks back. It's after this failure that the mad scientist realizes that if he wants to conquer the world, he's gonna have to take out Godzilla. Gee, like, he doesn't have decades worth of other fights behind his belt to prove that fact. For all we know, this Godzilla and the Showa Godzilla might be some sort of merged entity. After all, this Godzilla seems to not really want to attack humans, and just seems to show up whenever another monster shows up to cause trouble. I should also point out that in this manga story, there are moments where the monsters talk to one another, and yeah, this Godzilla is acting more like his Showa counterpart, where he's more like a hero than a villain. The next fight, the Doctor decides to step up his game by sending a clone of both Biollante and Megalon. It's not really clarified if it's the same Megalon from the Showa movies, but seeing as how he'd be twice as tall as a Showa counterpart, and seeing as how a bunch of other monsters are just clones of their originals, I'm just going to assume this is a different Megalon altogether. He, along with the cloned Biollante called Neo Biollante, confront Godzilla together. The mad scientist had the brilliant idea to somehow make Neo Biollante more plant than the original Biollante, But this introduces a huge weakness where Biollante needs to be constantly supplied with water. Despite this obvious glaring weakness, Biollante does succeed in trapping Godzilla inside of some sort of vine prison. Since I can't find every page of this manga online, I can't confirm whether or not Godzilla actually attempts to break free by using his atomic breath. Since this Biollante is more plant-like, she should in theory have an even bigger weakness against fire. While trapped inside, Megalon somehow makes his way inside, and the helpless Godzilla quickly takes damage from Megalon. Thanks to human interference, however, they're able to shut off Biollante's water supply, and Godzilla is able to break free, picking up Biollante and tossing her towards Megalon, who proceeds to one-shot her with his own beam weapon. So, not only did this mad scientist manage to give Biollante a bigger weakness, but also somehow made her less durable compared to the original Biollante. The original one was able to survive having an atomic breath blow through her body, but this one just gets one-shotted by Megalon. Godzilla makes quick work of Megalon by destroying him after ripping off his horn with his tail and setting Megalon on fire with his atomic breath. At least we have one version of Megalon that can square up against Heisei Godzilla, if you don't subscribe to the Gigan Rex theory, that is. Since Megalon was able to almost beat Godzilla with just a few hits, I am gonna give him the same power difference between Godzilla as Baragon. Biollante is a little harder to play since she never directly attacks Godzilla. She basically just serves as a glorified cage for the monster. Again, since I can't see all the pages from the manga, I can't confirm whether or not she's somehow able to take Godzilla's atomic breath attack. I can't imagine so, because that would make her more durable than Megalon when it comes to Godzilla's atomic breath. So I'm just gonna at the very least say she's twice as strong as Godzilla physically, seeing as how he's completely helpless to break out of Biollante's trap on his own. I'm also gonna give Godzilla a 25% power boost after each fight, since it will help explain a lot of power creep inconsistencies later in the story. Trust me, it'll make sense when I get to it later, especially since Godzilla's going to be having a lot more fights a lot more often than he's used to doing. Also, just so that we don't have a bunch of monsters around the same exact power level all the time. I'd like to think that the Mad Doctor's later monster clones would at least be above his earlier ones. The next 2-on-1 fight features Mechagodzilla 3 using the Showa Mechagodzilla design, and Mechani Kong 2. Just like with Biollante, Mechani Kong 2 just restrains Godzilla, while the other monster, in this case Mechagodzilla 3, does all the damage while Godzilla's restrained. And just like before, the humans help out, Godzilla's able to break free and make short work of Mechani Kong 2, and is able to destroy Mechagodzilla 3 after not one, but 2 direct hits with his atomic breath. This easily makes Mechagodzilla 3 the strongest of the cloned monster entities so far, just simply because he's the first one to take 2 atomic breaths to kill. The only reason why Mechagodzilla ends up being this strong compared to Godzilla is just simply because he's the first one to be able to survive an atomic breath and not be one-shotted, making him already twice as durable as pretty much everyone else we've covered so far. Godzilla then runs into Rodan. Whether or not this is the Heisei Rodan or not, it's not entirely clear, but it might as well be the Heisei era Rodan, since his size should scale roughly around Heisei Godzilla. He tries to hit Rodan with his atomic breath, but can't land a hit, and Rodan somehow manages to grab onto Godzilla and carry him all the way to the Arctic Ocean, and somehow freeze him. Why Godzilla didn't try firing his atomic breath at point-blank range to one-shot Rodan like he does with Batra in the movie, I have no clue. Anyway, the humans revive Godzilla with 2 nuclear submarines, and then Godzilla finds Rodan, rips his wings off, and kills him with an atomic breath. Now this is where the power scaling starts to get questionable. The last time Godzilla absorbed energy from a nuclear submarine, he grew 20 meters and got 200 times stronger. Now here's 2 nuclear submarines, and well, it's not really clear if it just simply restored him back his energy, or if it did that plus making him stronger on top of that. Since the manga, for what I can tell, doesn't make any mention of Godzilla getting stronger, just simply having enough energy to wake himself up, I'm not going to give him a power-up for this particular energy absorption. As for Rodan, I'll just simply give him the same power difference as he did against the movie version with Heisei Godzilla in the vs. Mechagodzilla 2 movie. I mean, it might as well, the timeline would certainly line up. The next story gets a bit weird, with the mad scientist getting a visit from his future self from the 28th century, which just raises a whole heck of questions, like, how did he live that long? And if he has a time machine, why doesn't he just simply go back in time and, stop Godzilla from being created, like what they did in the King Ghidorah movie, except this time actually make it work by bringing his own monsters and actually killing Godzilla when he's still a Godzillasaurus. He then takes the fossilized remains of an Ankylosaurus and, well, turns it into a real Ankylosaurus, and manages to de-evolve Godzilla back to a Godzillasaurus, though even in this state Godzilla is still able to have the upper hand. Seeing this, the mad scientist mutates the Ankylosaurus into Anguirus, and despite this, Godzilla, as a Godzillasaurus, a creature that was almost killed by bombardment from Navy ships, is at least able to survive fighting against the evolved Anguirus, though Godzilla himself comments that he needs to get back to his base form in order to be able to win. Godzilla manages to get back to his original size after a gas line ruptures, and then Godzilla absorbs the energy, which reverses the effects of the time warp beam, returning him to his original self. Also, this version of Anguirus can fly by rotating his shell. Interesting. He tries to slice Godzilla while spinning, but Godzilla manages to catch an explosive shell fired from the human's flight craft ship and rams it down Anguirus' throat, exploding him from the inside out. Time Machine is also destroyed, at least sending the future version of the Mad Doctor packing. Volume 1 ends with a shot of Gigan and King Ghidorah flying towards Earth. Oh dear. Leading straight into the start of Volume 2 of the manga, these are revealed to be clones also created by the Mad Doctor, which, if that's true, why are they coming from outer space? Shouldn't they be on Earth already since they were created on Earth? Also, despite these two monsters forming a formidable pair in the past, he decides to have them fight Godzilla one at a time like an idiot and sends King Ghidorah to fight Godzilla one-on-one. From here on, it's basically a reenactment of how their fight went down in the Heisei King Ghidorah movie. Godzilla fires his atomic breath, it does no damage. King Ghidorah fires his gravity beams, it does a lot of damage. Godzilla pulls a new attack out of his ass, manages to decapitate King Ghidorah, and then finishes him off. End of story. I should note, however, that in this fight, instead of using Godzilla's original spiral atomic breath, he invents a new version called the Nuclear Typhoon, where basically his atomic breath splits into two separate beams, allowing him to decapitate two of King Ghidorah's heads at the same time. I'm just gonna say it's roughly twice as strong as his spiral atomic breath, just simply because it's two of them this time. Godzilla should really get more attacks like that to counter King Ghidorah. Imagine firing an atomic breath that splits into 3 atomic breaths. Godzilla then goes to fight a clone of Ebirah, who's been modified to have bug wings because why not? After impaling him with a palm tree, Godzilla rips off his wings and finishes him off with a point-blank atomic breath attack. But not before Ebirah manages to spray Godzilla's face with some foam from his mouth. This foam actually manages to freeze Godzilla, with the Mad Doctor referencing Godzilla's weakness against the cold, which is likely in reference to the Son of Godzilla movies, and while Godzilla is frozen, the mad scientist basically mind controls Godzilla to attack the city along with Neo Gigan. The mind control effect doesn't last long, however, as the humans manage to free Godzilla, who then goes on to engage Neo Gigan and combat. Godzilla's noted at this point to be exhausted from his previous 2 fights against Ebirah and King Ghidorah, which is how Gigan's able to get the upper hand at first in the fight. The humans sacrifice their flying craft to power up Godzilla, restoring him to his full energy, as well as also giving him an all-important power-up. Godzilla with this new power is pretty much able to all but tank Gigan's attacks, as he manages to close the distance and rip off one of his arms. The mad scientist escapes inside of Neo Gigan's head, leaving the rest of the body to self-destruct, which barely does anything to Godzilla. I'm gonna put the power scaling calculations on the screen right now, because I don't want to waste time wording all the different number differences and whatnot. The mad scientist unveils his final monster in the form of King Godzilla. Originally created as a clone of Godzilla, whose DNA was taken at some point during the fight with Neo Gigan. I'm just going to assume it was while Godzilla was under mind control, because that would be the most convenient time to take a DNA sample. Not to mention, would explain a few things later, the Godzilla clone is soon combined with the DNA of King Ghidorah and Batra, whose body is found frozen in the Arctic. I don't really know what having Batra brings to the table, since Batra was already weaker than Godzilla in the vs. Mothra movie, and I feel like would have been overshadowed by all your other clone monsters at this point. If anything, he should have maybe used Neo Gigan, or just literally any other monster besides Batra. King Godzilla soon confronts Godzilla, who, despite having just gotten a power-up during the last fight, is still exhausted and is unable to fully stand up against King Godzilla, though he's still able to rip off King Godzilla's arms, which, yeah, I guess does confirm that the Godzilla clone's DNA was dependent on his strength prior to the original Godzilla's power-up during the Gigan fight. I guess it's more of mental exhaustion or him just being slower, but him still retaining his raw strength increase from the power-up. Despite this, King Godzilla's eventually able to grab hold of Godzilla and throw him off a cliff where he gets impaled on a spike. Godzilla's eventually re-energized when a bolt of lightning strikes down upon him. Before Godzilla can make his grand return, however, King Godzilla is already attacking Japan when the humans show up with their own creation, Machine G, which I guess in this timeline takes the place of the Heisei Mechagodzilla. Ironic, because the humans would make their own heroic Mechagodzilla later the same year of 1993 in the Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 movie. Talk about predicting the future. Also, for some reason, this image of Machine G kinda reminds me of the mobile suits from the Gundam series on the Gundam wiki pages. I can't quite put my finger on why. Anyway, Machine G fights King Godzilla and actually seems to be doing well, inflicting heavy damage on King Godzilla with his various weapon attacks. However, it is then that the mad scientist reveals that King Godzilla had a fourth monster DNA contributed to his creation, that being Neo Biollante, who appears in the form of a giant head coming out of King Godzilla's chest. I can just imagine the pure shock and horror on King Godzilla's face in this panel. Anyway, King Godzilla uses his Biollante head to spit acid out, disabling Machine G's weapons, and is about to finish off the mecha when Godzilla finally shows up. While I'd assume that most of King Godzilla's strength comes from King Ghidorah, who should be 15 times stronger than Godzilla was during the time of their battle, for all we know, it could have just been another repeat scenario where Godzilla just magically jumped to King Ghidorah's power, so that he'd surpass it a few fights later, just like he does in the Heisei movies, by the time the Heisei Mechagodzilla shows up, who should be above both King Ghidorah and the Heisei King Ghidorah, by the way. Godzilla destroys the Biollante head, then shoots down King Godzilla when he takes to the air, before finally grappling and tackling him into a volcano, though it's heavily implied by dialogue that Godzilla himself is still alive, which I guess would reason that King Godzilla is also alive? I hope they're not going to use the logic that because he's only part Godzilla DNA, he's not as resistant to extreme temperatures as Godzilla. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, but also the mad scientist cut off his head and put it inside King Godzilla so he could control him directly, because why not? The creator of the Godzilla King of the Monsters Kodansha manga would go on to write a sequel story many years later in 2018, but that's a topic for another day, and is technically independent and fan-made, so I wouldn't necessarily consider it canon to this timeline, but there is one thing relevant about it that I will mention in a future video. I should also point out that, of course, Godzilla's fine inside a volcano. He was literally fine inside of one for 5 years between the Biollante and the first Heisei movie, and this was a weaker Godzilla on top of that. Not to mention him swimming through magma and tectonic plates during the Godzilla vs. Mothra movie, which, even though it's very possible that this chapter was written before that movie even came out, I'm still going to consider it canon because the movie events itself are canon to this manga, or at the very least there was a fight between Godzilla and Batra, and most likely Mothra as well. Though I should point out it's also possible that these last few chapters could have been written after the movie came out, since these came out in June of 1993, while the movie came out in December of 1992. So how strong is the King of the Monsters Kodansha Manga Godzilla? Well, again, it's a version of Heisei Godzilla, but he gets quite a few power-ups throughout the movies, which I think definitely puts him above any version of Heisei Godzilla pre-burning form, but not quite being as strong as his burning form. I'd say he's definitely in a higher tier of solar system level, but again, I just don't think he gets any power-up that puts him on the same level as Godzilla's burning form in the Versus Destroya movie. I want to make a video going more in depth about what if the other Heisei era movies happened in this timeline and how they would play out, though I can just say right now, Space Godzilla is going to be in for a much more difficult fight, and the events of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 just wouldn't happen in this timeline at all. So I put this version of Heisei Godzilla below his movie counterpart. I kinda want to say though that his durability and strength might be just a little disappointing compared to his movie counterpart, where in my opinion he takes way more punishment in the movies than he does in this manga. But that could just be me, and maybe the monsters he fights in this manga are just simply that strong. Who's to say? But that concludes our coverage of the Godzilla King of the Monsters Kodansha manga. Join me next time as I talk about another alternate Heisei Godzilla, one that I've been wanting to do for quite a few years now, and I know at least one person on this channel requested me to do many years back. How strong is Super Godzilla? Join me when that video comes out. Take care.